communication, communicating with people in Senate and making sure that even if harm was caused, that you acknowledge it and that you rectify that mistake as you keep going.
And how are you going to manage your personal time in office, balancing classes and your other involvements?
One of the things that I do to manage my time is I make a list each day of all of the things that I have to get done. And so I can do the things that have to get done today, and then if I have time, the things that don't exactly have to get done today. And so I think that being able to keep that organization and keep that list of all of the stuff that I would have to do with ASCSU and my classes and my life as a whole would be one of the biggest things I could do to manage my time.
If you know anything about me, I have this giant spreadsheet on my computer with every assignment that I have to do for the rest of the semester, and I do that every semester. I also, before I start a semester, I kind of make sure that I know all my involvements, what I'm deciding to get into, and what I will most likely be, wanting to do. And so I think that when it comes to me balancing my personal time and involvements, that's me taking responsibility that, hey, maybe I can't do this, maybe I can't go to this event, maybe I can't hold this position, but still wanting to be active in there, just taking that step back, knowing that Senate is a job that I have and that I might have a job somewhere else, and making sure that I take priority as a Senate student and that maybe that job, and managing those times in order to effectively be there for Senate members and effectively be there as a leader in that space.
And this next question is a candidate-specific question for Mr. Taylor. You have promised to introduce legislation to make the Senate show students what legislation is being passed. How will this boost transparency, and how is it different than how other students already get updates on legislation?
So that legislation actually was passed last week unanimously within the Senate. And so that's something that can show the bills that we passed that fund specific things on campus, and so that the students can see how much we spend and on what. And so I think that kind of continuing that lead of transparency and visibility is something that obviously means a lot to me, because I did make a bill about it. And so being able to have communication with students is one of my biggest goals. And so that bill is one that's unlike any that we've had in the past.
Thank you. Going back to general questions, what is your perspective on the issue regarding empty Senate seats and the lack of representation within certain colleges, student offices, and other groups in the Senate? How will you address this issue? Starting with Ms. Ayala.
Thank you. I think when it comes to people who are underrepresented in those empty Senate seats, this year we are lucky and privileged to have many seats filled from most colleges and all SDPS centers. Centers. But I know in years prior that has not been always the case. And so I think having empty Senate seats, that comes down to, some people on the legislative cabinet to really reach out to those SDPS offices, or, those college councils, or anything that falls in between, and say hey, you have open seats, you have seats that you can fill to advocate for your students in your college specifically. And of course, there'll be probably some SDPS students and students who would want to serve the SDPS office over the college or vice versa. And so I think just the outreach to those to those centers and that college council can really help fill up those Senate seats that we have this year.
Thank you.
It's kind of a tough one, because we do have a full Senate now, and so if a situation did come up that we did have a lot of empty seats, I think the biggest thing would be communication and having the college councils and the SDPS offices to be able to say, hey, we have these seats open, this is what we do. And I know that if students do know what we do and they do know that we have positions open, they will want to join. And I know that because I'm one of those students.
Thank you. Every ASCSU session starts with land acknowledgement. Can you explain what this tradition means to you, and do you have any ideas to better support Indigenous students on campus? Starting with Ms. Ayala.
Yeah, of course. For me personally, the land acknowledgement means a lot. I am of Native American descent, and so with this land acknowledgement, acknowledging that CSU is a land grant institution and that it is built on a ancestral homeland, and that we as a student body can acknowledge that, you know, kind of that this land isn't ours or isn't theirs or some's. And so for me, the land acknowledgement means a lot. And so I think a way that we can help the students on this campus is mostly getting involved with NAC. We have a Native American Cultural Center on this campus that, you know, has support for students. As some may not know, it has tutoring. Like the NAC Center has a lot for Native American students, and if we can support them, if we can support NAC just a little bit more, we can help those students. And that's something I feel that ASCSU doesn't do much. We don't support our cultural centers that help those students and have those resources for those students already made and already like planned. And so I think, you know, backing up NAC and helping them and seeing what they need is the first step to helping our Native American students.
Yeah, the land acknowledgement is a good reminder to me, because it is easy to look beyond the past and to not always acknowledge like what has happened in the United States. And so I think that one of the big things to me would be having constant communication with the NAC office and all of the SDPS offices to see how we can best help the students with those identities.
Thank you. And with that, we will take a 5-minute intermission break. Thank you, Tim. All right. Welcome back from the intermission. We're going to start with a candidate-specific question for Ms. Ayala. You have said that the ASCSU Senate meetings can be unkempt, which will do you. So sorry. What will you do as speaker to resolve this?
I do agree with that statement I've said before. I think Senate sessions can be very hostile, and they can be very not constructive. And so I think for me personally, how I can handle that is kind of just making sure that everything stays in germane and in decorum, that we are talking about the legislation, that we are talking about our opinions and like facts about the legislation. And so I think for me, trying to keep Senate from being so unruly is mostly just sticking to our bylaws, sticking to those rules and saying that like, hey, I think this isn't germane. Can we move on to the next person talking? Or you need to like stay in decorum if you want to continue speaking. Mostly falling back onto our rules in order to unify and keep Senate, I would say, together.
Thank you. Going back to general questions, as Speaker of the Senate, you will be tasked with appointing the ASCSU Senate leadership. What makes an effective Senate leadership team, and how will you choose members that will not only fulfill their roles in the Senate, but also represent goals and needs of the student body as a whole? You can start with Mr. Taylor.
Well, an effective Senate leadership is one that has voices on all sides of all debates. And so having the voices of people who I don't always side with, people who those people don't always side with, I think would be massively beneficial, but also having people who can be good at actually leading the Senate body and being able to take the steps needed to guide us to the goals that we want to accomplish. And so I think that that's a lot of specific qualities, and so I can't comment to all of those at the moment, but it's a lot of kind of basic leadership qualities.
Thank you.
So as Speaker, we are not actually allowed to pick our cabinet. We don't really have much of a choice or a say over who our cabinet is. That's Senate's decision. So people decide to run for the cabinet, and Senate decides if they will be in your cabinet or if they won't. And so since I am a facilitator, I would, open up all those conversations. There's not going to be a conversation that I decide to shut down just because I might not like that person or I haven't agreed with that person in the past. But as Speaker myself, I have no decision over who becomes my cabinet, but it is my responsibility to work with them effectively to have a good and to have a working Senate.
Thank you. What clubs, organizations, and committees have you served in, both with and outside of CSU? And how will those experiences translate effectively as your role in ASCSU Speaker of the Senate?
So in high school, I was not involved in the student government, and I wish that I could go back and get involved with that. But I have been heavily involved in my life in Boy Scouts and in Taekwondo, and both of those have given me a lot of the qualities that I believe I need to be effective at leading a body like this. And then since I came to CSU, I've been involved with ASCSU, and I've been involved with my college council and multiple committees inside of ASCSU, and so I know a lot about the ins and outs of ASCSU and how that all functions, and so I believe that I could be good at leading that body.
Thank you.
Going back to high school, I was, I guess let's say, unofficially in my student government for about all 4 years. I held multiple roles over these years, and one of the most critical I would say that translated over to this year is the internal relations manager position that I held, mostly making sure that any internal disputes got held responsibly and respectfully to both parties and that we were able to continue to move on. Here at CSU, I'm heavily involved, almost a little bit too much. I am currently in a club sport. I am on an intramurals team. I serve as the vice chair for the DEI committee. I am in SFRB, college council. I kind of do a lot on this campus, and I really take pride in all of what I do. And I think all those roles kind of just help me be able to understand where everyone is coming from, because not everyone is the same in those, many organizations that I just named. But being able to talk with everyone is so important when it comes to being the speaker.
Thank you. And going into a personal question for Mr. Taylor, you said that one of the reasons you would be good in this position is because you were a peacemaker during outbursts. Can you explain a time during your ASCSU experience where you distributed peacekeeping abilities?
So a lot of that, like I believe I mentioned at the same time as that statement, is behind the scenes. And so that's talking to people outside Senate, and when the Senate session has finished, to know kind of what they think about that, and then being able to take that and talk to somebody else with an opposite view. And I think that mostly what that speaks to is my ability to speak to people and to talk to people and have civil conversations when that's needed, and be able to know what people think about specific issues within Senate. And so I don't have a specific example within Senate, because that's not the job of Senate, that's the job of the speaker.
Thank you. Going back to general questions, it's noted that the Student Fee Review Board is responsible for allocating nearly $57 million a year across many different outlets. As a speaker, you will be part of this board, and so how do you feel your presence and opinion can make a difference, and how do you plan on holding them accountable? Start with Sayala.
I'm gonna just challenge your question a little bit, because I don't think the speaker holds a role on SFRB, but I think they hold a role in LSAB, the Legislative Strategy Advisory Board, in which we look at legislation coming through the county and the state. And so I think for me sitting on SFRB, we do handle a lot of fees, and we do look at fee areas like the LSC, the rec center, and athletics, and they come to us if they want a fee increase, and we kind of look at it as students, like, can students really afford this? Is it really needed? But as a speaker, most likely sitting on LSAB, the Legislative Strategy Advisory Board, looking at those legislations and those pieces of bills, and seeing if it's good for our students, and seeing how we can read those or talk to our politicians and see if those are bills that students at this school would be affected by, or even faculty at the school would be affected by.
Thank you.
One of the committees within ASCSU that I've been involved in is the Internal Affairs Committee, which looks a lot at legislation that we have, and they've seen most of the legislation that comes to Senate. And so I think that that's given me a lot of knowledge about what happens behind the scenes, and how to make an idea the best that it can be when it comes to a final product. And so I think that that's something that I can give to any kind of a committee like that I would be on.
Thank you. And how do you manage on leading such a large and diverse group of senators each week? Sorry, Ms. Ayala?
Sorry, repeat that one?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you manage leading such a large and diverse group of senators each week?
Gotcha. I think I can manage leading. Like I kind of said in Senate this past week during the vote of confidence, is like taking that time outside of Senate to really like take that time to myself, not really devote my every waking hour to Senate because you need a break. And so having that time to myself, I think, leads back to being able to effectively lead such a large and diverse group of people because I'll have a clear mind. I won't have much bias, or at least not portray my bias, and allow that that the discussion in Senate run efficiently and effectively. And I plan to, like I said a little earlier, try to make every voice feel heard, or at least provide a space that every voice feels like they can be heard.
Thank you.
When it comes down to it, Senate is a team. And so being able to lead a team, I think, is one of the best analogies that I can think of leading the Senate. And so I've talked a little bit about my time within Boy Scouts and being able to lead some of those people within that. And so I think that a lot of that applies to Senate as well, because it's a lot of the same kind of situations that we get into. So I think that being able to lead the Senate is a lot like leading a team, and just being able to know all of the people within Senate and communicate with them and see what they need out of a leader.
Thank you. And the next question is a personal question for Ms. Ayala. You discussed during your campaign that you plan on increasing accessibility. What does accessibility mean to you?
I think for me personally, accessibility means that, kind of what it says, like we are being accessible to all people. And so we have captions when it comes to our Zooms and our live streams that you can read off of if you have like a hearing problem. And we are being accessible when it comes to our legislation and pieces of bills. We have a 48-hour rule that all bills and legislation needs to be sent out beforehand to give every person who needs that like time period to read through it and to truly understand what that piece of legislation is saying. And so accessibility is something that I would like, or I will follow strongly, because we need to be inclusive and of course accessible to all students and all people who decide to want to involve in Senate and want to involve themselves in Senate.
Thank you. Going back to general questions, both of you have used the word community heavily in your campaign. What does this word mean for your campaigns, and how will you utilize the community aspect in your job if you get elected? Sorry.
To me, community means two things. It means community within ASCSU and community within CSU's campus as a whole. So community within ASCSU, which I've talked a lot about tonight, is just kind of having that team aspect of it and having the civil discussions and not letting that get out of hand as it does sometimes. And community on the CSU campus is having people know what ASCSU is and be able to get involved with that. And so two of those goals of mine I would be pursuing heavily as speaker.
Thank you.
For me, I think community is like the people or who you are trying to build up. So inside of Senate, the community is, the senators' associates and, anyone who falls in between. I think building that community inside is the first step to making like a strong foundation to build the community outside of ASCSU. And I know for me personally, I've done a couple of outreach stuff. Like I've gone and talked to high schoolers who are even looking at this school, kind of like explaining that, hey, I'm an ASCSU like representative, and I'm, I do this and this and this. And so I think building community on and off this campus is very important for a speaker to do that outreach. But it all starts making sure that internally that Senate has a community and has like a thriving and friendly community that you can build off of in order to outreach and make community with others.
Thank you. If conflicts arise within the Senate chamber, such as heated debates and arguments, how do you step in to mediate?
I think that healthy debate can be good. And so having a healthy debate and healthy discussion is not something that I would have to get involved with. But when it gets to the level of some of the ad hominem attacks that we see sometimes and that kind of thing that moves beyond a discussion of the policy, I think is something that then I would have to step in on. But as long as the discussion on the policy at hand is civil, I don't think that I would have to step in with that. And by stepping in, I would mean something along the lines of kind of winning Senate back to one and kind of keeping us as a community, and so that it's not like a one against one kind of a thing, like one side against one side of this debate, and having it be one body looking to accomplish the same goal.
Thank you.
I think when it comes to handling discussions that get out of hand or arguments that aren't exactly germane in Senate, I think that comes back to falling back on our bylaws, making sure I'm following the rules and not giving my opinion or my personal statement on a lot of it. Calling conversations ungermane, keeping senators and associates in decorum and speaking. And if I truly feel that the conversation is out of hand and that there's not a way that we can kind of diverge it back, ultimately moving on. Going into, there'll probably be in discussion debates going into a voting period, I think would be, a best option for that situation if I cannot, center that conversation again. And also falling back on, like I just said, our bylaws, constitution, I think is the best way to handle a lot of those situations since we have rules set up. So following those rules so I don't hurt anyone or I don't get in trouble by, speaking out or saying something that I'm not supposed to.
Thank you. And this next question is a personal question for Mr. Taylor. During the last Senate session, you mentioned that you will rely heavily on social media if you were to get this position. Could you please explain some of your social media strategies and what you hope the outcome will be?
I think that one of the best ways to connect with people of the college age is with social media. And so one of the best ways to get the name of ASCSU out onto campus is social media. So I think pushing to have some additional accounts and maybe having a Senate account of ASCSU to post weekly updates of what Senate does, and so that the CSU campus can know what we do and be able to follow with that is a big goal of mine.
Thank you. Going back to general questions, the Senate is responsible for a lot of different functions and actions. What do you believe is the most important action or function that ASCSU is responsible for? Starting with Ms.
That's a hard question. We do a lot. We do a lot of stuff. We cover a lot. But for me, I think the main thing, or like the most that we should focus on, is students. That is the reason why we're there. That is the reason why we were created. We are the Associated Students of Colorado State University. We are there to help, serve, and improve students' lives on this campus. And so I think the main thing, or what is the most important to me, is benefiting students and ultimately passing bills, legislation, and resolutions that will benefit most of the student body, because we can never get to every student, which is unfortunate to think about, but it is reality.
Thank you.
ASCSU acts as the voice of the students, and so I think that using that we can do a lot of things that we do with, say, funding, and funding things that the students want to see. We have a bill talking about the tuition increase, which is something that students want to see. And so I think that acting as the voice of the students and being able to have communication with students so that we can be the best voice that we can be to all of those students would be one of my biggest goals.
Thank you. How can you, as Speaker of the Senate, reach out and hear from the voices that sometimes feel disconnected from ASCSU?
Thank you. Let's see. It's hard to know, or it's hard to think that you're not reaching every student. You go to college councils, you go to SDPS, you can go to sports, but even that doesn't encase every student, because there are possibly students that are undeclared, and that is, of course, their own college, but you don't really think about them when you think of colleges. And so, a way that I can hope to reach the voices that aren't being heard or feel that they aren't being heard, I think is making, my office a place for students to come in and give me feedback, making my email public and open for students to come and tell me or even email me anonymously and just kind of give their thoughts and share. Opening pathways for students who feel unheard to reach me and to communicate with me, I think is my best bet in reaching every student on campus.
Thank you.
As I mentioned in the past, I think that social media is a big way to do that, and just pushing the name of ASCSU out as much as we possibly can so that all students know what we do is the best way to connect with those voices, because sadly I think the best way to have those voices be seen is to have them come and speak to us, and so they cannot do that if they don't know what we do. And like I mentioned, I'm one of the people that is in ASCSU because I found out what it was and thought that sounds like something I want to join. So having that name out, I think, would be one of the biggest things that we can do.
Thank you. This next question is a personal question for Miss Ayala. On your Instagram platform, you stated that you plan to increase communication between students, Senate, and the Board of Governors. How do you plan on bridging the gap between such large groups, such as the student body?
I think for me personally, being involved in a on-campus helps. When it comes to such a wide variety, that comes back to communication. Being able to make those college council meetings, introduce myself, make sure they know how to reach me, how to talk, make sure they know my office hours. And with the Board of Governors, we sit, I think the speaker sits in on some of the meetings, or at least some of the big ones. And being able to convey what I have learned from Senate and what I've learned from those college councils and SWS offices to the Board of Governors, sharing these are students' opinions, these are what students feel and how they feel about the decisions you guys are, you all are making. And, even if the Board of Governors doesn't hear me, at least acknowledge that I've told them and that I've decided to fight for students' voices.
Thank you. Going back to general questions, what does an efficient and effective Senate look like to you? So, Mr. Taylor.
I think it looks like some of the best meetings that we've had in this Senate, the meetings that people can come and vote on specific bills that we have and move on without having a lot of the same kind of conversations being had, the same kinds of voices saying the same kinds of things, and the same kinds of kind of unwelcoming spaces that sometimes come up. And so having the Senate be on a path of efficiency mostly means having civil discussions so that we can pass as many bills as we can and be able to be the voice of the students.
Thank you.
I think an efficient and effective Senate looks like that we are discussing, we are talking. I think even if we don't pass as many bills or legislations or resolutions that we hope, we have achieved something. We have achieved community, we have achieved, communication. As long as, for me at least, as long as Senate is talking and is working and is actively making steps forward towards helping students, that is an effective and that is an efficient Senate to me. We don't have to pass 6 bills and resolutions and Lexes for it to be an effective Senate or an efficient Senate. We just need to make sure that we are still taking steps and we are actively moving forward to helping students on this campus.
Thank you. And what do you see the purpose of the gallery input on legislation? How would you promote Senate sessions so that students can know when and how they will be able to have their voice heard on opinions to the Senate?
I see gallery input as a very good thing when it comes to legislations. Hearings, because students don't really get, they are represented by their senators and associates, so they don't get direct input, but gallery input gives them a way to directly input on legislation and things that we are talking about in Senate. And so I think just making sure that whenever bills are coming through, that we let the appropriate students and the groups that bill affects knows that they have a voice and that they can say something directly towards that bill during gallery input at the beginning of Senate. I see it as a great thing because we can hear students' voices who might not have been represented by the constituents due to opposite opinions.
Thank you.
I think what that comes back to is visibility and communication. And so gallery input is a time that people can come and speak about kind of anything that they want, so they can ask us to make a bill, they can talk about bills that we have, and so the best way to have people know that that's a path to communicate with us is by having the visibility that we need to see and having all of the students on the CSU campus know about ASCSU and know how to come and communicate those opinions to us.
Thank you. And with that, we have completed the 2023 Senate debate. Thank you guys so much for coming.